you guys should have your 2 slab bowls, your 2 pinch pots. We'll work the pinch pots first. The rims of the pinch pot need to be pretty much matching each other in thickness. Right now, one of my pinch pots is a little too thick in some spots. So I'm just gonna go along and pinch it, even it out for myself. I also want to kind of look at it bird's eye view like this to see, as I rotate, to see if there's anything, if it pops up too much in a certain spot. And you'll be able to know what I'm talking about. Close one eye as you rotate around and you'll see it. Like right now, doesn't look like there's anything really significant. There's like this little, there's a dip, like there's too much of a dip right there. And I can kind of pinch that a little bit more like that till it raises up. I've pinched it so it looks even. Again, if you look at this perfectly, if I were to like hold this up, close one eye and rotate it, I can see where it's too tall. And wherever it's too tall, I can just kind of shave off a little bit. Don't dig too deep, because if you dig too deep, then you're gonna mess it all up. Then you can eyeball it again. It's gonna be noticeable if you have to do that, if you have to trim anything, when you put them together, like so. If there's like a big gap, like right here, I see there's like a gap on this pot, I'm gonna need to just sort of shave off a little bit right here. You can do that with your rib tool. That might actually be easier than just cutting it, because you might end up cutting too much off. So you take your metal scraper, and just kind of scrape it down if it doesn't meet up perfectly. The other problem that I'm having right now, and that some of you might have, is that the pinch pot that's a little bit floppier right here, it's not meeting perfectly. It doesn't perfectly match up. Like the rim, this is more open, this one, than this one. Uh-oh, that's okay. What I'm gonna do is I can close this up a little bit just by compressing the top. If I compress it gently and rotate over time, it'll kind of go back in for me. Okay, that's pretty good. I feel like that matches up a little bit better at this point. I rotate it around and I see there's a gap. It's like a little gap right here, even though they're connected. What I can do to fix that is just pinch a little bit right here, and that should make it a little bit taller, and it should match nicer. All right, so I'm ready to connect them. So I'm gonna scratch. So you take your double-ended tool or your needle tool and make spiral scratch marks. You should see the fingers of clay popping up. You should see them popping up. If you do just this, the fingers of clay don't come up if you're just cross-hatching. They don't come up as well as if you go and make squiggles all the way around. Don't rush the scratching. It's super important for you to get those little fingers of clay to pop up, because when they're popped up like this, and then they're popped up on the other side, what happens is they hold on to each other. That's what's important. You don't have any scratch marks and you have little bumpies and fingers coming up, there's nothing. There's no hand holding, okay? So I scratched that one. Now I'm gonna scratch this one. One of these pinch pots is gonna have a flat bottom. The other one, you should maintain the roundness of the top, because you'll be putting a lid, you'll be cutting a lid into this egg shape. You'll also be decorating it. I'm gonna take slip, and I'm gonna put it down without rubbing. I'm not gonna rub back and forth because that gets rid of the fingers. I wanna make sure that the fingers are still there, they're just covered in slip. So I'm gonna tap down all the way around. If you have an old brush at home, like a paintbrush, and you wanna use a paintbrush instead of your finger, you can do that. Okay, only one side. One side. Then you put them together. And what you want to do is you twist a little bit. That kind of locks in the fingers, the little clay fingers. Okay? It looks kind of lumpy and it's obvious that this is one pot, pinch pot, and that's the other, but you're gonna make it not obvious by doing the next steps, okay? I wanna make sure I don't have any gaps. I should see the little, the slip squishing out. It shouldn't be oozing out. That means I had too much slip, but it should actually have no gaps. Gaps are bad. Okay, after that, I'll support it with my hand so it doesn't, you can also take a cloth or a towel that you're not using in the house anymore for other purposes besides art, and put it down underneath it, sit it on something soft, and it won't flatten out on you, or just hold it. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stitch up. I'm gonna go down with the thumb tool, and then up, down, kind of every so often just kind of change my direction a little bit. That ensures that it will stay connected if I mix it up a little bit. One of your pinch pots might be squishier than the other at this point, and that's okay. Just try your best to, like, this bottom pinch pot for me is a little harder, but I can still kind of dig right there a little bit and push it and fill in the gap. So I'm going from top to bottom and then bottom to top, all the way around. This is what's called a composite form. Composite means two, made of two. This is going to be a container that you guys are gonna decorate with coils on the outside. I wanna be sure not to push into the seam. So I'm really kind of, if I'm gonna dig against the rim, the meat of the rim, I'm gonna go below the seam line. So I don't wanna push that seam in more than it is. So I've stitched it all the way along, like so. My next step, I'm gonna smooth it out a little bit first, my thumb. I don't wanna press on the seam at this point. I'm gonna make a coil or a couple coils. It doesn't have to be one coil, it can be several coils. And I put a coil around here, kind of patch it. I don't really need this much clay for the coil that I am going to make. So I'm just gonna take off half, like a chicken nugget size amount. Gonna squish it like this. And then I'm gonna roll it out. So I roll forwards. See how I'm lifting my hands up? I travel, 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 like this. I'm not staying like this. If I do this, all it's doing is flopping back and forth like this, and it will flatten. That's why your coil will flatten. That's why. This is gonna be important for later. Maybe not necessarily right now, because you don't have to have a pretty coil, but you do have to really lift your hands up, roll, lift, and come back. You'll get better at this as you go. You don't necessarily need this long of a coil. I could attach several coils all the way around for this. Just to review coils, I wanted to kind of make a longer coil. If I am making a perfect coil, and this will come in handy later, okay? This side is flat, then it gets round, and then it gets flat again. So I'm gonna solve this side first and make it round by touching where it's round with one hand. And then I sort of lift and twist gently, lift and twist, till there is a twist in it. See the twist? Okay. Then I roll on top of the twist until it rounds out. Travel, travel with those hands. Give yourself enough space too, okay? Gonna twist real quick, roll out. If I don't need this, I don't need all this coil. Right now it's like, it's too much coil. I wrap around like twice. So I don't really need to roll out the whole thing. I can say, I don't need you, this part. I can save this for later if I'm still working with coils, and I probably should. Okay, so I got my coil. Any excess that I don't need anymore, any excess of at any time, take your clay, scrunch it up, nice and tight, put it back in your bag, spray it with a little bit of water if you're leaving for the day or you're done, or just leave it there till the end of class. You want to flatten your coil out for this because you'll have to flatten it anyway. So might as well be flat. When you're working with fresh clay, like I could scratch this coil with just a little bit of slip and a toothbrush, and it creates scratch marks. All right. This is a tip for later. I wouldn't be able to use a toothbrush on this because it's not fresh. This is older clay. So I would need to scratch like this. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna scratch inside that seam, make little squiggles pop up, little fingers of clay, and it will be complete. Both containers will be complete by next class. Don't leave them out to dry though. You should put them back in plastic once you've attached them together. There's a balance between too much and too little for slip. Okay. Take my flattened coil. I put it on. Push down gently. Doesn't have to. You don't want to push too hard because then you're going to push the seam. It'll break stuff. So I put it all the way around. Just rip it off the excess. Crumple up the excess right away. Put this, crumple it up with your other ball of clay that you just were using and put it back in your bag. It's important that you guys are maintaining your clay and not letting it dry out for the sake of not having any clay dust, number one, and also to maintain your clay to make sure you still have enough to work with. Okay, there we go. It's attached. Now I want to smooth out. I can take my thumb and smooth the clay going up. I could do two thumbs at once if I felt so inclined. Like this. I do want to make sure I've pushed enough so there's no air between the gap and the coil, otherwise the coil will fall off later. Even though you have a whole bunch of scratch marks, if there's any air between the coil and that gap, it's just gonna fall apart or explode. There's an air bubble. And you just continue to, if you have too much of that coil and there's too much, just take it off with your hands. You don't want to create lots of little clay goobers, so just be neat with what you're doing. You can kind of all put it into one pile. I'm trying not to give you guys too many assignments where you are carving away clay and creating clay dust. You're mostly going to be building. We'll get into the carving part when you come back to school. So I smoothed it out roughly with my fingers. I can take my metal rib and start scraping now, or I can wait till later. Sometimes easier to do it while it's still soft. You're not pushing as hard, and it's not creating too much clay dust, I guess, this way. And remember, when you scrape, you kind of scrape a couple times, then you have to get rid of the goobers. So just put the goobers in a pile. These you can just put into your bucket and toss outside, so you probably won't have enough. Or if it's still wet and it's squishy, like right now, I could just put this back in my play bag. So you're gonna smooth this whole thing out. It shouldn't look lumpy, shouldn't look weird. You should close one eye and look at it from the side to see if your curves, we did with this with the bottles, if you remember, you made sure that the shoulders were the same. You have to make sure the sides are the same. Right now I can tell that this is way more curvy than that. And if I know that's happening right now, what can I do with this side? I can add a little more clay if I want, or I shave this down more. But if I add more clay, I gotta make sure I scratch, add some slip, and attach. Okay, so as I scraped, it's pretty smooth, it's getting there. And I like, it's very curved on this side, and this side's kind of flat. I could flatten this side to match this side. That's just gonna be a little more work for me because this is the only part right here with my hand is that it's really flat. And I scraped off and there's these divots. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna add some clay at this point. I wouldn't want it to dry out anymore to do this. So I just add a little water on my fingers and rub. Now is where you can kind of scratch without it being squiggly. You're just kind of patching in a little bit of clay. So I scratch like that. Get a fresh chunk of clay, flatten it out just a little bit. Scratch this side. I could work with the toothbrush if I wanted to at this part because this side's super fresh. Put some slip down where it's going, like this. And the most important part, this whole thing, is I'm gonna tap it a little bit to make sure that there's no air in there, but not so hard that I'm just gonna make a further divot. And I'm gonna gently smooth with my thumb. I don't want to push too hard because I might warp the shape and push in. This is an empty form, so it doesn't have a lot of strength to hold itself. I put enough on there, like it seems like too much, but as this dries, I can scrape this back a little bit more. Sometimes it's better to put more on than you want and take off some later than have to continue to put more on. So I patched that a little bit. And when I look at it like this with one eye closed, and even keep my hands on it like this, I do notice that I do need to fill in this gap right here a little bit more. Because when I put my hands like this curve feels nice and curvy. And this kind of feels the same where my thumbs are. It's the same. And then there's differences here. Like this doesn't feel the same as this. So I'm going to patch a little bit up here too. So I make sure there's no gap, no air bubble in there. Otherwise it'll just fly off later in the kiln. Pop right off. Gently smooth it, push it, and then smooth out the rest. And I can manipulate the shape even more without wrecking the shape later, basically. Right now it can be lumpy and bumpy. I'll let it dry and then I'll scrape it more on that side. As it firms up a little bit more, then I won't jeopardize it by pushing too hard. Okay. And as I go around with my hands, now this feels pretty consistent, like the curve feels consistent. I mean, this feels lumpy, but I'm going to scrape that down. It should be smooth by next class. You'll be doing more work on this for homework than you are for the slab bowls. On to the slab bowls real quick. If you're still working on your pinch pots putting together, this is a recording for you for later. Take your bowl out. There may be some residual oil or something that you put in there, so you can wipe that down. This container is going to be a little more simple than the other one. Not simple, like easier to put together, but we won't be doing as much with this one. I do want to make sure that when I look at it from above, it doesn't look like, it looks round, basically. I need to kind of eyeball it. Right now, this side's really straight and that side's really straight. I can just sort of manipulate it a little bit till it looks round. You can always take a little container of water. This goes for any sort of manipulation you're trying to do to the clay once it's firmed up a little bit and become a little less floppy. So right now it's just a little, it's not as pretty as it could be, this rim. Like it's lumpy in some parts. So what I'm gonna do, also the other good thing about kind of working on the rim and making it look nice is that you are also hydrating it a little bit more and getting it ready to connect. The more even the rim looks and less wonky, the better. Okay. They should line up. Should be like a little hamburger bun. Okay, you're gonna make this into a container or a delicious hamburger. Just kidding, maybe. I haven't had a hamburger in a long time. Maybe that's why I'm thinking hamburgers. Okay, should line up. Put it on top first. You can kind of push in. If it's the top, if it's not lined up nicely, see if it lines up. Do the same thing you just did with the rim with this one. Make it look prettier. Without opening the shape up too much. You don't want to like push, you don't want to pull this way. You just want to support with one hand. See, my outside hand is supporting as I just sort of rub with my other fingers after I dip in the water. I don't want to warp the shape of it. I just want to work on the rim. So I'm ready to scratch. I would definitely not be able to use a toothbrush at this point. Toothbrush is for scratching and slipping is only if you're putting fresh clay on fresh clay. It is important that both slab bowls are at the same moisture level, okay? Because these are thinner than my pinch pot, they definitely have to be happy together because they will separate if they're not the same moisture level. That's why ceramics and working with clay is all about timing. That's why it's hard to get things done and projects. It's impossible to complete a project all in one sitting for an hour because you do have to let things dry to a certain point, and that involves you leaving it out for a little bit and then wrapping it up. So it's going to be important as we are working by ourselves at home that we do these things. This has not been asked of any ceramic student in the history of my class. I have always been the one to leave things out for a little bit and then wrap them up until they're the perfect level of working for the students because it was in person. But now we're not in person, so you guys are doing this. And that's why I'm trying to make the project simpler, still interesting to do, but you should be able to prepare your pieces before class by leaving things out, setting an alarm to remind yourself to go check on your clay, not letting it dry out. If it dries out, work quickly to fix it or make a new slab, that sort of thing. So you are being asked to do a little bit more than usual, but not in a way. Projects are simple, but you do have to keep track of yourselves. All right, I've scratched both sides, then I'm going to add slip. I want to make sure that when I put them together, that one side, one half doesn't go in too far, that both edges fit perfectly. Right now, the top bowl for me is going in too far. It's like an underbite, right? If this is a person's mouth, it's an underbite right now. So this bottom half is sticking out too much. I need to make sure that they meet each other perfectly. So I can just sort of gently lift this back up and just kind of pull this part out just a little bit till it meets up perfectly. Still a very fragile shape. It should be stiff enough where it's not collapsing on you right now, but it still kind of should be squishy and manipulatable. Nope, that's not a word. Be able to be manipulated. Okay. So I want to make sure that I just sort of press gently from where my hands are like this. I might not be able to see any slip squishing out, but I definitely shouldn't see any gaps. But I don't want to press too hard at this nice round shoulder because then I'm gonna ruin the shape. So just be gentle about it. As long as you have enough scratch marks and there's slip, it will connect and there's no gaps. Okay, there, it's connected now. What I'm gonna do Same thing with the thumb tool. I'll stitch together. I don't have to make one big long baby coil. I can just roll coil in my hands like this. Another way of making a smaller coil that you just need a little bit of, just to roll in your hands. Looks like a worm. It's gonna go on here. And I can do that all the way around. Without trying to bend the shape at all, it's gonna be hard. Hold it, okay? There's a lot of holding and balancing your pieces while you're trying to work on them without messing them up. So this is definitely great exercise for arm strength, you guys. It's almost like you going to the gym. Scratch my coil. Oh yeah, I forgot to flatten it. I'm gonna flatten my coil out. I kind of gotta work quickly with these little baby coils because they will dry super quick. That's why I'm not gonna make a giant baby coil because it'll be too dry, too fast. Little pieces of baby coils. Put it down in the spot, put it down at the seam. Smooth out with my first finger and my thumb. I might just leave this to dry out a little bit more rather than trying to manipulate it too much right now because I don't want to jeopardize the shape of this container right now. So this is fine for now. You do have to smooth out this for next time. It has to be perfect. But for your hamburger bun container here, it can look like this until it dries out a little bit. So just to reiterate, I attached them together and then I made baby coils and I'm gonna put baby coils, flat baby coils around it. Just like this had a thicker coil, okay? Leave this out for at least an hour once you've done this part and then put it back in plastic. Or if you have time, you can scrape it. Just be careful because it's fragile here, it's fragile here, and it's fragile pretty much everywhere. Your shape is gonna get manipulated a lot more than this. This is a little more sturdier because this, your pinch pot thickness of the walls in the pinch pot are way thicker than your slab bowls, okay? That's basically it. So for homework, you need to put together these two forms. This one has to be perfectly finished. So once you attach the coil at the seam and smooth it out, and you can let this dry for like an hour if you want to scrape it while it's a little bit drier, or you can scrape it right now. Just make sure the shape is perfect, like it's the same amount of round as it is on the right and the left. So you just sort of turn it like this, close one eye, and just keep seeing if there's a difference between them. And you can, as you are scraping, you can change the shape, or you can add clay. At this point, you can add clay. You wouldn't be able to add clay once it dried out later.